This episode is sponsored by La Guaira Ayahuasca Retreat. La Guaira is the highest rated ayahuasca retreat in South America, with over 600 five-star reviews on Google. La Guaira combines authenticity, accessibility, and affordability. You'll experience powerful, authentic ceremonies led by indigenous shamans in a stunning venue located just 1 hour from Medellin in Colombia. Surrounded by nature, yet with comforts like hot water and Wi-Fi, it's the perfect place to connect, heal, and grow. La Guaira's team has guided more than 2,000 people through life-changing transformations, and they keep it affordable with retreats starting at just $645 US. Whether you're coming for healing, clarity, or a deeper connection to yourself, La Guaira is the best choice. If it is your first time drinking ayahuasca, you will love La Guaira's 3.5-hour preparation course and integration support, all included in the price. And if you mention the Universe Within podcast, they will offer you a free bodywork session during your stay. Sam Believ is the founder. I interviewed him on episode 166 of the podcast, and he's a really good guy with a good heart. So if you'd like more information, visit laguaira.com to book your retreat or to learn more, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Tricia Eastman. I came across Tricia's work fairly recently, and I was really impressed by what she's doing. She's I think really doing a lot of really beautiful projects. She's gone very deep into the Iboga Bwiti tradition. She has a NGO that she's working to bridge ancestral voices. She's involved in bringing psychedelics more to the populace at large, and just, I think, a really fascinating woman. It was really a pleasure for me to sit down and to talk with her and connect with her. I think we've actually had a very similar life story in many ways, and she's just done a lot of really, really beautiful things. And sitting down with her and talking with her, I think she really shares this work, her vision, and this kind of wisdom very beautifully. So it was really a pleasure for me to speak with her, and I think you all will get a lot out of this episode. I'm shooting this a little bit in advance, so at the time of shooting this, we are actually all sold out for our retreats, but we will hopefully have our 2026 schedule coming out in the next month or two. So if you're interested in working with me, you can always check out my website at nicutianarustica.org or my Instagram page at Jason Grachanik, which always has our upcoming retreats. And then, as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's always a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, leaving a starred rating and a short review, all of those things really help to get this show out to a bigger audience. So I think that's it. Also Patreon. If you're able to support this podcast, Patreon is always a really big help. As always, thank you to all the people supporting that way. Something we spoke about in this podcast is this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from these conversations, it's a really beautiful and meaningful way to give back. There's also different tiers you can sign up for. Also, those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. So if you're able to support in that way, that's deeply appreciated. So I think that's it for the intro, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Tricia.
Running out from the maze, I'm running out from the maze, I'm running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Amazing. Well, thank you. We're officially rolling or recording now. So we were chatting a little before, and it's really a pleasure to have you on. I think you have a really fascinating story. You're doing really good work, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that. I would imagine some of my audience has heard of you. They're familiar with you. Maybe they've listened to podcasts. Maybe even some of them have worked with you. But for those who haven't, I know this is always a huge question and many directions you can take it. But Can you speak a little bit about yourself, who you are, your background, and kind of what in life led you to do what you're doing now?
Thank you. First off, it's such an honor to be here. As I said earlier, I bow to your work as well. So, it's just such a blessing to finally connect. And I would say that, I started working with psychedelics at a very young age, but not in a sacred context. And my father just passed away June 17th, so not that long ago. And one thing I realized in his passing was that I would have never had the courage to go on the path that I did, which is very unconventional. My life is, really working in the space with psychedelics and plant medicines, doing global advocacy work for Indigenous-led stewardship, and really honing in on the bridge between the sacred, our relationship with nature, because I feel like that's where the biggest gap is with the modern day psychedelic movement. And really, as a woman also in the space, I think it's really important to, have a voice and, bring something to the psychedelic space that is, moving really fast, not really looking at the unintended consequences related to how things are happening, whether that's the relationship with stewardship of nature and all of the medicines that come from nature, which, really should be the heart of all of how we orient towards our connection with the medicines and the plants. So really, the work that I do with my nonprofit, Ancestral Heart, is what's nearest and dearest to my heart. That's really where I'm focused on the Indigenous-led reciprocity. I work really closely with the Kogi Kagaba, who are in La Sierra Nevada, with the Mamus. And the Mamus are really kind of like the high initiates of the community, and they spend 9 years in darkness. And so after the 9 years, they are tested to see if their consciousness has fully opened. And if it hasn't, they're sent back into the cave until they have actually completed the initiation. And I have to say, since I first connected with the Kogi in 2015 and really started supporting their work, they've been a guide for me, a guide for helping me in this vision that came through my own daily meditations. I meditate every day, but not with taking any kind of psychoactive substance, just my own spiritual connection. And I receive a lot of information every day. And one of the things that comes through quite vividly is a lot of messages from these different groups that I work with, such as the Mamus. And I received a set of instructions back in 2019 to build essentially a center of excellence, of really a place for people to come, learn, reconnect to the sacred, bridging kind of the more Western scientific with ancient wisdom, but in a very respectful way. So not really something that is self-initiated, but it's more about connecting the two together and seeing what the emergence is from that relationship. And so, that has really been my primary focus now, less doing retreats, which I used to do a lot of retreats working with the medicine, Iboga, which I'm an initiate of the Bwiti tradition. I just actually returned from Gabon. This was my 7th initiation in the Fong Bwiti lineage, which is the lineage that I study. I've also been initiated in Gonde Mesoko. And, there's so many different branches of Bwiti and differences. And I think now the world is really, really talking a lot about Iboga and ibogaine. It's because, which I never would have imagined. I met this medicine 12 years ago. I worked at a clinic in Mexico called Crossroads Treatment Center, and I ran the psychospiritual program. And when I came into this work, I was like, I went to the medicine and I said, profound healing for me, a profound, really grounding in my authentic self that I had really experienced for the first time, which brought on such a deep wave of self-love and self-acceptance that I had never experienced before. And in that experience, I said to the medicine, how can I be of service? And I was asked to facilitate the psychospiritual program. Now, walking into that program, I'm not a medicine woman, walking into it. I'm not I don't like the word shaman because it's not even the appropriate word, but it's recognized when we're talking about this topic. So, I wasn't that when I came in, but I realized after coming into it, the level of integrity I had to have if I wanted to continue on this path. So I've literally really, over the last 12 years, been focused on my own purification, my own healing, and and to be of service because these medicines have such a profound potential for humanity, to support humanity, but they're not a magic pill, and they're not on their own capable of doing that. They need to be in the context of a container, which, if you look at, if I'm not mistaken, you come from Shipibo lineage?
I worked a long time with the Shipibo. I mean, I've had a number of different teachers, and certainly a lot of the Shipibo teachers I consider very, very close teachers. The lineage that I work in is actually mestizo, but I've been very close to many Shipibo.
I love that. So the Bwiti tradition and the Shipibo and some of these other traditions, and even mestizo traditions, are they have a commonality in that they have very deep purification rituals that are designed to cleanse the individual of their trauma. And really, if you are not properly cleansed, if you are not operating just like, the Kogi have to spend 9 years in a cave. That's a deep purification ritual. And then there are these spiritual tests that are performed by the elders in that community. And if those have not been done properly, the initiations, those particular openings have not occurred. The same is for any person working with medicine. If you have not properly worked through these specific purification rituals, you can't really be a conduit for the energy that is necessary for healing. And so it really is the number one most important part of the process, which I think it will be really exciting to talk to you today about, like, how you do that. And then my education in Bwiti, because I watched your documentary and I absolutely loved it. I wish it was longer and there was more in it. And I remember seeing you taking the medicine from the tree bark, asking permission, and then taking the dirt from the ground and healing the tree with it. That's exactly what we do in Bwiti. When we take medicine from the tree, we do a divination, we ask permission, we cut a little diamond mark with a machete, and if it lands outwards, it means it's a yes, or if it's flipped with the bark side down, and then if it's flipped the opposite direction, it means no. And so really there's this intricate process that I think these traditions both really are a core aspect of it, that there's a whole ritual kind of spiritual protocol through it. And so that is what makes the medicine work. Without the blessing of the spirits, that the plant spirits and the in Bwiti we call them genies, the elementals, the forest spirits that support the healing process, it's not effective. I mean, it does something, but it's not the same. So really, that kind of summarizes in a very roundabout way my background.
Yeah, that's amazing. It was interesting. One of the things you mentioned right off the bat was you, in your, I guess, younger years, you were interested in psychedelics and you were working with them, but you said not in a sacred way.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like awakening or transition of working with these substances in one way to even being interested or having that idea that there is something sacred about it, and like what does that look like for you? How did that change into kind of a shift of cosmovision or worldview where you're actually looking at these things now as a sacrament?
Well, I will say that when I was younger, the first time I really had what you would call a true psychedelic experience was when I was 14 years old at Thanksgiving, making marijuana brownies with my dad, my dad grew weed. And when I was 17, he had a psychotic break, an attempted suicide, and it was triggered by cannabis use. So he had the gene for schizophrenia, and the cannabis triggered the actual activation of the gene, is my understanding, and I'm no expert in schizophrenia. But that led me down this path of fear towards psychedelics, because my stepfather, who my real father's very unconventional, but I mean just a really incredible creative artist, but my stepdad was very different, and he always was like, you don't want to end up like your dad, and if you do psychedelics, he would kind of try to scare me. So when I turned 18, moved out of the house, I started going to raves. And at first I didn't do a lot of psychedelics, and then I started to dabble with MDMA, and a little bit of psilocybin, but not high doses, like maybe like 1 to 2 grams, like more of like a, what they call museum or like, I hate to use the word party dose, because, I don't really resonate with the idea of using medicine, to party. And, so when I was about 23, I just realized that, there was a research study that came out, and it said that, MDMA causes brain damage. And so now, I think it was just last year, they found out that study was done incorrectly and was actually wrong. And the research on MDMA is, I mean, obviously it can cause oxidative stress, but more than anything, it changes the patterns of blood flow in the brain, from the amygdala to the frontal lobe of the brain. So it can actually repattern trauma, probably in one of the most effective ways of any of the classic psychedelics. And I wouldn't even call it's technically empathogen. So I stopped doing it, and then at age 28, I had a traumatic brain injury. And this traumatic brain injury, which I had no idea, no one really puts this information out there, triggered massive anxiety. People that have TBI, and I've learned this a lot working with like veterans and Navy SEALs and other special ops who have had like blast wounds, like blast where they, have a traumatic brain injury as a result of a blast, they can have a complete change in personality. So like someone who is, just like a normal, even-keeled kind of guy or gal could go from being like a rageful person. So, for me, what it triggered was massive anxiety. I went to a cognitive behavioral therapist who did role playing with me and was just like, having me treat anxiety as this character in my psyche, like this part of myself. But this was before IFS, so I wasn't like talking to the part like, what do you need? And, what, where do you come from? And all this stuff. It was more like, oh, there's this part hanging out, this guy at the party who just like is there and you have to accept it. Well, after doing that, and then I saw another therapist, and I can't remember if she was like I can't remember what area of psychotherapy she was in, but she was like, oh, you're just like a chihuahua. A chihuahua has this temperament of being anxious. And I knew myself. I was like, this is not me. I do not feel normal. I was very withdrawn. I was having social anxiety. I was, basically I had to settle and go to a doctor and get Xanax, which, was nowadays would be the last thing on the planet that I would do. But literally to just make it so that, I could live my life and it could be tolerable. And so in this feeling of despair and hopelessness that I was going to be like this for the rest of my life, I decided to kind of go on this quest. And I was like, I am not giving up. I met this incredible spiritual teacher, changed my whole diet, went to like a raw food diet, started to learn how to cook or not cook, prepare technically raw food, and got really like more into the alternative holistic culture. And that brought me back into the music scene again and back to MDMA. And so I took MDMA and this time the MDMA really brought me into a more internalized experience, one that wasn't about partying and, being at the club and overexerting myself and then having to spend a week recovering from it. And in that experience, I got a really clear message. I was in the shower after, being out dancing. And I feel like dancing, when, you really let yourself go, can put you into this mystical state. So it like opened, like, I would call it maybe like a Kundalini awakening would be the best expression. And what happened was I got in the shower, and as I was in the shower cleansing myself, I literally went into this altered state of consciousness, and I just, like, my higher self, or whatever you want to call him, it was so long ago, came in and was just like, you're not living your life. You're not living the path that you were meant to live. You need to leave your life. At the time, I had a business. I had 4 houses. I had rental houses. And I walked away from everything. I gave the houses to my ex-husband. I got divorced. I traveled the world for a year and really went on this journey, just going deep into the yogic teachings. It really was an activation for me. And for me at the time, I was working in the wellness industry. So I worked for an aromatherapy, French aromatherapy spa company, and then I transitioned into doing wellness consulting, and it was my dream my whole life. I'm this is my happy place. I loved my work. I love my job. And I studied every form of massage and every form of herbalism and aromatherapy. And I read this book, Plant I think it's called Plant Spirit Medicine by Pam Grout. And in that book, she talked about the spirits of all the plants. So I was learning about the spirit of mullein and the spirit of wolfsbane and the spirit of this interesting plant from the jungles of Peru and Brazil that really was intriguing to me called ayahuasca. And immediately I was like, yes, I need to meet this plant. This is really important for me. And at the same time, I started to research it, and I'm like, this does not look very safe to just go to Peru and show up, or go to Brazil and show up and, take some psychoactive plant, mind-altering plant, and, do this experience. So I never sought it out. And then in my travels, after, a little over a year of traveling, this was in 2012, my friend who, I met at Burning Man, it was my first year at Burning Man in 2012, comes to me and she's like, yes, there's this Taita from Colombia coming to Los Angeles, and he's going to be doing 3 days of traditional ayahuasca yahe ceremony. Would you like to come? And immediately I felt in my body, I was like, that feels like a fit, which, like in the level of education that I had versus where I am now, very, very different. And, I wouldn't recommend people drinking ayahuasca in the Hollywood Hills, but I will say that it was a blessing to work with a true Taita who really, initiated me into a different way of working with medicine. And that experience changed my life. It showed me a deep understanding of who I was. Really a lot of it was very archetypal, and it provided a lot of healing around myself. And when I walked into that ceremony, I had a respect. I'm a very brave, risk-taking person, but I had respect. And I was like praying to the medicine. I was like, please don't break my brain. I do not want to be schizophrenic, thinking. And I wasn't really that scared, because I remember when Edwin is his name, opened the ceremony, he was giving everyone rapé with this giant tepe. And the first guy comes up, and this is like very new. So most of these people have never sat before. It's not like where, now it's like everyone is doing it every weekend in the Hollywood Hills or whatever. And so the first guy comes up, he gives him the rapé, and the guy like screams. He's like, "Ow!" Like it's like burning his nose, and everyone like kind of goes like that. They're like, and then he's kind of like flagging who's next. So I'm like, okay, I'll go next. I stand up and I like, get up there and receive the clearing with the rapé medicine. But that would be, I would say, the biggest catalyst in my transition of seeing that, the ceremonial ritual, the tools that were used, the prayer, the, different types of purification in my introduction into that sacred container. I could tell it was the difference between night and day. It was like this medicine can be directed into your body for inner contemplative work and healing. And I had never really considered that. And so that was the biggest shift for me. Sorry, I wanted to give you the long version because I haven't told it in that way before.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of parallels. I also was into raw food for a long time. That was a big
Mm,
part of kind of my awakening to plants, food as medicine, and
yeah.
also then taking a long journey around the world. And I think 2012 is when I kind of dove quite deep into ayahuasca. Um, like obviously it's always difficult to speak of kind of these first experiences, and they're very personal and not even necessarily to be spoken about. But was that ayahuasca experience for you? Did was that kind of the catalyst that then began to give you some sort of like a feeling or a sense that what you were working with could be transmuted, overcome, and kind of a deeper curiosity to go more into this world of plant medicine?
I never wanted to go more into the world of plant medicine when I started. I was actually very resistant to it. It was always a very clear calling where it was like I received multiple confirmation. And in my first ceremony, it was crazy. There's a lot of celebrities there, and one of them was a very famous actor who played a vampire on TV. And well, a few of them actually were. And he had a essentially like an exorcism, like a possession. And again, everyone was like this when the guy's like shaking around, and I stood up. I grabbed you probably know the name, the little fan that's made out of plant. This was all automatic.
A
Like I don't
shikapa?
yeah, shikapa.
Mm-hmm.
And like Edwin turned into a jaguar and he started snarling at the guy, and he's like saying all these things in, I'm guessing, Spanish that I couldn't understand. And he's like, then he says in English, "You leave him alone." And then he's the one that tosses me the fan. He pulls the energy out of the guy. I catch it on the fan. I throw it outside. And then everyone in the room is like kind of like in this state of shock. And I go up to him, and the guy that had the possession, and I give him a hug, and I'm like, "It's okay." And then everyone in the room started crying. And it was like the weirdest experience of my life. I mean, that's the thing I remember the most about the journey, because like I never would have the volition within myself to stand up and do that. It wasn't even me. And then afterwards, Edwin like took the sweat off of his face, and he like wiped it on my face without saying anything. And what it felt like was this dissolving of separation, like where I was really a prisoner of seeing myself separate. And in that, it opened me up. So a lot of the things that kept me repressed, or where I wasn't fully expressing myself, or where I wasn't like I grew up in a Christian background. So like sexually, like all of those, kind of different things. I felt like there was like this opening where it was like integrating the separation that was inside me. And so that opened up a new chapter of my life of being really open. The thing I remember the most about that cycle in my life was having the most open heart I think I've ever had in my entire life. And, I worked with ayahuasca a total of 6 times. And very specifically, like, I don't actually do a lot of medicine. I do medicine and I integrate it. And during those 6 times, that was between 2012 and 2015. I'm sorry, 2014. And in 2014, Iboga came to me really clearly, Iboga and ibogaine. And once I started down the path of ibogaine and Iboga, I don't work with any other medicines except for at the clinic we worked with Bufo alvarius and worked obviously synthetic 5-MeO-DMT. Both are pretty much one and the same. And so occasionally I would do a little bit of work with 5-MeO, but other than that, really to this day, I just work with Iboga.
And how did you find yourself in it was an ibogaine clinic in Mexico or an Iboga clinic?
So it's crazy synchronicities. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. My dearest friend, we all lived in a house together in Topanga. When I went through this awakening and I gave away my houses and I traveled the world, I had no idea that there was going to be a point where I couldn't make any money. I was homeless, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm free and liberated and I'm just choosing to travel the world and learn spiritually. But literally it was like, okay, now it's time to get back to the real world. But when I was trying to do the things that didn't fit my old way of doing things, it just wouldn't work. So literally my car got repossessed. I lost pretty much everything, and I was like sleeping on couches. And that was a liberating experience for me. Maybe I can actually honestly say the ayahuasca might have been a little bit ungrounding for me, from my constitution specifically. And I think I wasn't really paying enough attention to the 3D, if I look in hindsight, to really like taking care of those responsibilities. And so during that time frame, I met this guy and I helped him buy his house and furnish it. And in trade, I got to like live there, and it was like this beautiful house in Topanga. And there was all these other kind of like interesting dear friends of mine, healers, that were living there as well. And one of them lived in Costa Rica with the 13th generation Misoko Bwiti healer. And so he was working with people with Iboga. I was given a small amount of it to try. Which the term microdosing had just begun to exist in the field of because James Fadman coined that term, so you could call it that. And then shortly after that, my dear friend Alicia Carlander was working with Martin Polanco at Crossroads. And in 2014, we were in Ojai, California at this like community gathering. And that's where I met Martin. And I said to him, I've had eating disorders my entire life. And, if ibogaine can interrupt opiate addiction, I wonder if it can help with food addiction. And he said, I don't know, but let's do an experiment. So literally, I was like the guinea pig at Crossroads for, and this is like, when we look at ibogaine and how it came to the West, it was Howard Letzoff, which was primarily for addiction, and all the clinics in, Mexico. Our clinic was in Baja, the hospital in Tijuana, and then you would go down to Rosarito after the treatment because of the necessity for hospital access and medical staffing. So essentially, the only way that it was used was for detox, like flood dosing. And then Martin started talking to different people. He was on Joe Rogan, Timothy Tim Ferriss, all of these kind of like big podcasts, back in the day, just like being one of the first people talking about ibogaine and treatment and psychedelic therapy. And so Martine wanted to create a program so that people could have a psychospiritual, medically supervised experience, because there are safety risks with ibogaine and iboga, and the cardiac monitoring, especially in the West, because there's such a lack of training and understanding, which, being a Bwiti traditional practitioner takes a minimum of 10 years of training and that's, full-time living in Gabon, like in study, not just like going once a year. And so he was the first one that I'm aware of to create a program where people could go. And so Alicia was starting to design that program. And as, he was discovering that, he was thinking about like, what are some of the ways that people can receive healing from ibogaine? And I happened to have that conversation with him. And so he treated me. I was gifted my first ibogaine experience, which is just such an incredible blessing. It's not cheap, and not because people are trying to make money off of it, because doing a fully medically supervised treatment costs a lot of money. There's a lot of costs involved. I mean, right now, if you were to go to Beyond, I think they have like a scale, and I think it's like starts at 12,500 and goes up to 19,500 for a single ibogaine treatment. And that depends on how quickly you book and, financial need. But if you're just a regular person who doesn't have a financial situation and you schedule a treatment, you don't book it way out, it's 19,500. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. So what was that like working in a place like that? I mean, I think we can speak more about Iboga, the Bwiti tradition, but I mean, just being in that clinic, you must have seen some crazy things, some amazing things. I mean, usually most people, when they think of ibogaine and an ibogaine clinic, it's very often, as you said, to treat addictions, opioid addictions, people who are often in quite a bad spot, and they're often coming there as kind of a last resort. What was being in an environment like that like for you?
I mean, the work with Iboga and ibogaine is all about facing the deepest, darkest parts of yourself, and you can't run away from them. That's why it's so effective at treating opiate use disorder and any other form of addiction. It's incredibly effective. So when I was in the clinic, I mean, the first time I received a treatment, I was doing my session alongside someone who was doing an opiate detox. And the person doing the opiate detox, it was gnarly. This guy I could just hear him purging like all night, and he kept getting up, and I don't know if I was hallucinating this, but he told me he did get up, but he was like, making sure that I was alive, because, you just go into this state of craziness where you just can't tell what's real and what's not real many times with ibogaine and iboga. And after his treatment, we were riding in the car to Rosarita, and he just looked like he was run over by a truck. He was a mess. And I had this rose quartz heart, and I handed it to him, and I said, "Here, this is a gift for you." And I didn't see him for several days. He stayed in his room. He never left, didn't come out for meals. And at the very end of the retreat, as I was leaving, he looked at me and he started crying. And he said he just held the stone and cried for like 3 days nonstop. And so, I've seen a lot of experiences like that. I've seen, and I would say with ibogaine, because you're not getting the whole profile of all of the alkaloids that are in the plant, which are really profound and really kind of create a holding and a more full experience. It can be a little more harsh. It's definitely effective at resetting the brain, healing, just like really clearing out all of the things that, really are like toxic in the body, whether it's through throwing up or sweating or releasing somatically. But it's hard. It's really, really difficult. And typically I would see a group of 6 people at a time when I was facilitating the psychospiritual program. I would say on average about 2 people had an experience where, they had some kind of mystical aspect, but most people were in the dark under basement of the underworld, like the deepest, darkest level of the underworld the whole time. And so after they had a rest day, I would give them 5-MeO DMT. And this was back when, Crossroads was one of the first clinics to do 5-MeO DMT. Annie Ortiz, who's kind of like one of the veterans of Bufo and 5-MeO, she introduced it to Martin Polanco. And so we would do that on the final day. And that was kind of the light at the end of the tunnel for people. They would typically have some kind of mystical experience. But I would say without that, I think people would have left feeling a little like, just raw, really raw. So, working in that environment, I could see there was a lot of things missing. And I went to a center in Costa Rica, and that was facilitated by a group that had been initiated in the Bwiti tradition. And I saw the gap of doing this in a clinical environment and, without some of these sacred elements, and doing it in a more traditional context. And I started to train and learn. And in 2016, I got initiated in the Fang lineage of Bwiti, and really started my path of study in that. And I really felt, coming out of Crossroads, and in no way is this to discount doing it in a clinical setting, because I believe that 99.9% of the people that are Westerners that are serving ibogaine or Iboga outside of a clinical setting do not know what they're doing, and they're doing reckless things that are endangering people's lives. And so I think at this point now, because so many people are interested, and I get literally messages almost daily that the clinical setting is the safest setting, but it is really lacking in the ceremonial, sacred tools that I think really are profound for healing. So, really to summarize it, I feel that working in the clinical setting is the safest way and profound, and you get great healing from it. And if you're coming to treat something, if you have a traumatic brain injury, if you have an addiction that you're working with, as long as you understand what you're working with, that you're going into this, more clinical environment, which most people don't know the difference, because they haven't experienced Bwiti in its traditional context. It's going to be incredible and effective, but it's almost like, imagine you have the most refined machine, like, I hate to use a materialistic thing, but like a Ferrari. Imagine you have a Ferrari and, it's like the most perfect, maybe even it's a Bugatti, whatever, the most perfect car that, does everything, and it's got every option and it's incredible in every way. But you just drive it in first gear, and you never actually use all the features of the car. That's what ibogaine is to doing Iboga in a Bwiti context. It's like you're getting this tiny little sliver, which is, wow. I mean, look at how everyone's talking about it. You're like, wow. But when you work with spiritual masters, like one of my spiritual fathers, Nima Pablo, who has been working in the tradition for 50 years, like literally I was in tears just at like the blessing that I get to work with him, because the knowledge and the understanding of just techniques and tools for really clearing and healing everything. Iboga is just a tiny little piece of the pharmacopoeia of medicines that are used in traditional practice.
Why do you think iboga or ibogaine is so effective at treating addictions? Do you think it's something specific to that medicine of really taking us into the nature of the mind, kind of the addictive looping qualities of the mind that's kind of at the root of the mind? I mean, do you think other plant medicines could have that same effect? It's just they haven't been worked with that? Or do you think there's something in the ibogaine, the chemical structures of it that's very beneficial of that? But like I guess from your experience of the ibogaine clinic, and then also working in the Bwiti in Gabon, what do you think it is about ibogaine that seems to be so beneficial to people who are struggling with addiction?
I mean, there's so many layers to it. And I would say, the first layer is that it specifically works on the kappa opioid receptors. It also works on almost every neurotransmitter system in the body except for the endocannabinoid system. So when you're talking about something that literally is going in and fixing all of the receptors, just from a, medical perspective or a neurobiological perspective, that is really key. I feel that the dopamine system is deeply connected to addiction, and everything in our society is really centric around this imbalance and this dopamine seeking. And the seeking pattern is the opposite of what Iboga does to the body. The seeking pattern is the desire, wanting more, looking, versus like sitting within yourself and being grounded in presence and in breath and connection. And what the Iboga does, I saw this, it was at the 2016 Gita Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance conference in Tepoztlan. This doctor took a picture, and some people would call this pseudoscience because science doesn't really acknowledge an auric field around the body. But when we look at the understanding of what an auric field is it's the distance for which each of your senses reach. So it's not an energy field. It's like, how far away can you hear? How far away can you see? How much information can you receive? And when you look at someone who is in addiction, or someone who is not clean, like they're not eating clean, they're eating McDonald's, all this, their field is limited, meaning that their sensory perception of the world is dampened. And what the Iboga and ibogaine do in the actual session, according to this scientist, doctor, it pulls the entire field of the senses back inward into the body. So you have no sensory perception. This is why when you try to walk on Iboga, more than any other psychoactive substance, you are imbalanced and you can't do anything. Literally, like you need to have someone help walk you to the bathroom because you literally have no senses. The things that tell you, hey, there's a stick over there that you're going to trip over without, I don't think people realize how much our senses give us information that we can't see and hear. It's like more expansive than that. So what happens is it pulls that into the field, back into your body, and as a result, you are essentially forced, and the way that shows up is you're forced to look at everything internally within, whatever those patterns are, however that manifests. There's always a psychospiritual component to how, all the channels within your brain and your, neurotransmitters work. And so what happens when you are in that space is it essentially creates buzzing in the ears. So you can't hear anything externally. If you're trying to pick up sound, you'll start to have auditory hallucinations possibly, and it'll be so confusing. All of a sudden, you'll just hear all these voices, and they'll get louder and louder. And until you focus back in on the internal work and what you need to see and what you need to face, that won't go away. And so what it does is it has this like mechanism, like all of these different mechanisms where it's like literally like if you're not being present and if you're not connected to your heart and just breathing, you're going to have a hard journey. So if you're in your head, oh my God, don't be in your head. When you're in the cleansing process, if you're in your head, you're just seeing the most gross cosmic slop of the entire universe, and it is not beautiful. You do not want to do that. You're much better just like focusing on your heart, breathing into your dantian, really focusing on your breath, allowing things to arise as they come up, the psychological material that is being, what would be the best word? Integrated, looked at. And then it can be a really incredible journey, but many people struggle on Iboga because in most of the clinics, they don't understand how it works. So people their energy tends to go to their head. They can't let go. They have a really hard time, but it doesn't matter because the reality is you're going to go as far as you're ready to go, which is perfect. And then no matter what, it's scrubbed out everything. So, all of a sudden you start to have the effects of the medicine wear off, which could be 48 hours later. It can be very long. And the light starts to come back in. And all of a sudden, everything is brighter. The senses are more acute, very, very acute. Your smell, your taste, your touch, just like, like when you do a dieta or, work with other medicines, you're going to have some increase in sensitivities. But I feel like with my experience has been with Iboga and ibogaine that it's much more dramatic. And there are some really interesting studies. Gul Dolan, who I love, she is such a fun person. She did the study on MDMA and octopuses and their social ability. So she did a study where she compared all of the windows of neuroplasticity of every psychedelic. And I think psilocybin, it was like 1 week. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 2 weeks for ayahuasca, and then you get to ibogaine and Iboga and it was 1 month. So it has the highest window of neuroplasticity of any psychoactive substance. And one of the reasonings she says in her research, she thinks it's because of the length of the journey, because it is significantly longer than a psilocybin experience or even an LSD or San Pedro experience. But I would say that in Bwiti, in the traditional practice, you go to get initiated for Musanza and Mobondo. And Musanza is luck, and Mobondo is grace and blessing. And so if you want to do something that is going to make a big change in your life, you go through this process. And then after the initiation is the opportunity where you put all of the things in place to create that life for yourself, to have the right habits, to, I remember watching a documentary on someone who like got the message to go back to school. So he was like, I've got to go back to school and learn, and, like to start these positive habits and self-care. And if you do that, then it can be incredibly, profoundly transformational. And so the way I see that neuroplasticity window is that that's your opportunity to create the life that you've always wanted for yourself. And that really is the most important time, not the ibogaine journey itself or the Iboga journey itself, but that month after.
It was interesting when you were speaking about the kind of movements of Iboga. I was reminded, I think it was 24 or 48 hours after the rebirth ceremony, and it was a very small hill, but every 2 or 3 steps I would just have to stop and just hug a tree, and it seemed like an eternity I was there before I just had the physical strength or even the wherewithal to take another few steps to the next tree and then stop again. And it was quite a journey. One of the things you mentioned, I think earlier, which is such an important subject, and I think it's also very part of something I feel quite strongly about, which is this idea that you were saying a big part of kind of the quote unquote modern psychedelic movement is this disconnect from nature. And I think that's a bit embodied what you were speaking about in the ibogaine clinic as well. And a number of years ago, I remember I was at the MAPS conference in Oakland, and I was listening to a talk from a woman who was working with ibogaine. I can't remember who she was now, but a guy from the audience stood up and he said, I resonating with what you're speaking about, but I actually worked with Iboga and probably Gabon, and for him, like there was something about the person administering it, the music, the ritual, the dance that for him was so special, and of kind of the whole experience. He was saying, well, this for me was the most kind of transformational aspect. And I just remember it was very strange because the woman who was giving this presentation, who was also up on stage and with the accolades and the letters behind her name, she just kind of dismissed it like, well, we don't do any of that stuff, as if it wasn't important. And I think it also reminded me when I mentioned earlier, much like you, I was traveling around the world, but predominantly in Asia, but I found myself in Mongolia, and it's a long story, but I was on this horse up in the north, and I was looking for this group of people. I think they were called the Satan, the reindeer people. And probably looking back, I wasn't doing it in the best way. I mean, I didn't have good gear. I had a small backpack, but at the time I was super young and free, and just those things didn't really mean much to me. But I do remember one night I was on the top of this mountain, and this huge storm came in, and it was probably the first time in my life where I had like a literal near-death experience. I mean, the temperature changed, and it got so cold, and I was literally freezing up there. And like a lot of fear obviously was coming up, and but then at a certain point, like somehow it went away, and this huge warmth came over me, and somehow carried me through the night. And I remember waking up the next morning and just kind of overlooking this great expanse of mountains. And like that trip for me was really, I think, the first time where I was like actively seeking something shamanic, like something, a people, an idea, a way of being. And that morning, it just became so clear to me, like the essence, like from the land of where this like very deep prayer, this very deep knowledge was emanating from. And that it almost seems crazy in a way to remove that from the land, like the land was the life force of that knowledge. Can you, I know it's probably a big question, but like obviously, as you were saying, for sure, an ibogaine clinic for some people is a very good option.
Yeah.
And as you said, like, this idea that we're ready for what we're ready for, and
Yep.
that's always good in an absolute sense. But so much of, I think, of the wisdom, the knowledge, the true healing of a lot of these plants goes beyond even what we would consider healing in a way, or medicine, and maybe our more Western way of looking at it is just
Hmm.
some physical ailment that's being cured. There's something much deeper than that. And I think that aspect of nature is such an integral part to these systems. And when that is removed, that there's so much knowledge, so much wisdom that's lost. Can you speak a bit about that? Because I thought it was so interesting that in the beginning of our conversation you mentioned that as an idea that you also feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think underneath everything, and this is the beauty of these, it sounds almost like you were on like a vision quest in a way. You'd put yourself in a situation where you were really forced um, to face some fears, and maybe unintentionally. This brought about a form of a mystical experience. It wasn't necessarily a visionary mystical experience, but it gave you a sense of trust and safety, of a greater design. You were out in, what country were you in again?
This was in Mongolia.
In Mongolia. So really funny story. So my dear friend Snow Raven, Zarina, is Saha. I'll have to introduce you guys. I think you would really love her.
Mm.
So when you are in nature, you are connected to the truth. Nature can never lie to you. It is the design of everything, of the entire cosmos. And everything that we experience is a biofeedback loop of our own consciousness. So when we are taken out of a place where we can't succumb to our vices, and where we can't run from things or distract ourselves, we have to look in the mirror, and nature is the most powerful mirror that exists. You do not need to take any psychedelic or plant medicine. You can receive everything spiritually that you need to receive through nature if you are willing to sit with yourself and sit with the discomfort, and allow yourself to move through those layers. It's just like doing a Vipassana. When I was back in I think it was 2013, I did my first Vipassana meditation where I had to be in silence for 10 days, and I could just feel every day the layers coming off that were in my body. And I remember on day 8, I had this grief baby that was living in my stomach, this like gray ball of just like, yeah, like just looked like glop. I don't know what you would call it, but it was like energetic, of course. And it came out, and I just was hysterically crying. And so, nature is a healing technology, and the primordial laws are essential. We are here to be creative beings, and in order to be creative beings, we have to follow those natural laws. If we are oriented towards laws or ways of being that are out of harmony with nature, we are essentially in a space of extractive being. And in that imbalanced extractive being, we're stuck in a loop. We may not realize how much of a loop it is, but it is a loop. And I've had many times where, living in the world, which is, I believe, my dharma and purpose, to live in this Western world. Otherwise, I would have been born in a jungle. that you have to reconcile that relationship and how it permeates, and how we have a responsibility to clean ourselves. I mean, here's a really interesting thing. There's this guy, Jason Field, who I really love. I think he's going to be the next Gabor Mate, and he really talks a lot about somatic trauma, but looks at science. And he said the percentage of cases of autism in the city versus people who live in rural areas is astronomically higher. We're talking like over 50% higher number of cases. So when I think of someone who's autistic, like really getting into the science of it, it's about metastasized trauma and stress. And when an individual is in a place where you are outside of the natural system, which metabolizes the environmental toxins, which moves the energy, versus being in a stagnant place where you're accumulating energy, it affects your mental health in more ways than we can even imagine. And so really getting into nature is energetic hygiene. It's absolutely essential that we have that relationship. And what happens, I believe, because of our neural pathways and how easily they are able to be trained, like, for example, being on your cell phone. Just a little bit of being on your cell phone. And I've had the medicine say this to me so many times. I'm so guilty of it. Like being on social media, it's a slippery slope. And it changes the dopamine in the brain. And, I look at the amount of time that I've spent in my lifetime doing that, when that's not something that's really satisfying. Really, ultimately, when we're doing something where we're seeking dopamine, we're actually seeking connection. And there's so many other places we can get connection, but most important of all is nature.
Yeah, I love that idea that nature is truth. There's a beautiful quote I often think of. There was a samurai. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and he was considered the greatest samurai, which probably was true because he was alive to talk. And if you weren't a great samurai, you were usually killed. So, but apparently he was never defeated. And he has this beautiful quote that he says, "Reality," or I think you could substitute nature for reality. But he says, "Reality is not what you want it to be. It is what it is, and you must bend to its will or live a lie." And I think that's just, it's so beautiful. And I think it goes to a lot of the heart of this plant medicine work as well. Also, one of the interesting things you spoke about, which I often don't hear people in this kind of line of work speaking about, is this creative element, this act of creation. Like usually when we're working in the traditions that I've worked in, like whenever you're doing some sort of healing work, like one of the fundamental pillars that these plants are going and trying to work on, and again, I think when this work is done well, is this idea of your creative element, whether that's your work, your relationship to, I mean, your kids could be a creative element, but there's something about that creative force.
Yeah.
I mean, even like from a Christian point of view, like God is the creator, and humans are made in God's image. So the kind of the highest thing that we can do to honor that idea of God is to create. And I think that's just, it's something that's so often overlooked, and as this really fundamental part of what does it mean to be human is to create. Can you speak a bit about maybe more when you're speaking about that idea of creation, of why that's so important in this field of work?
I mean, really, the orientation of all life is that the core intention is to be in a state of creation. And the way I see it, this is the last chapter of my book, Seeding Consciousness, Plant Medicine, Ancestral Wisdom, and Psychedelic Initiation. And I talk about the understanding that, really, truly, my first Bwiti father, who has passed, Atum Rabinga, who is one of the most respected elders of the Bwiti tradition that's been alive, that is known to the world. And he said that Earth is a school. We are here as students. We choose to come here as students. And so the way that we orient to learning is through the creative process. And the creative process, to me, is really tapping in from an inner alchemical perspective, which I talk a lot about this in my book, about the idea of healing alchemy. And from that perspective, healing happens as a side effect. So in Western psychedelic culture, the focus is on healing. If you just focus on healing and you make that your highest intention, you're just going to be healing your entire life. You'll never run out of things to heal. No one's perfect, and we were never designed to be perfect. So you could focus on that forever. And honestly, you're not going to feel empowered. You're not going to feel joyful. You're not going to feel fully expressed if that's how you choose to live your life. If you orient towards creativity and orient to your heart being the guide for that creativity, opening your heart and receiving the things that feel like, I'll use the word dharma, like your dharmic purpose of creating. Like maybe it's writing a book, maybe it's building a retreat center, maybe it's studying a specific martial arts and really putting your heart and soul and dedication into the practice. Whatever that is, as you enter that process, you don't even need to name what you need healing. I mean, obviously, if you're doing healing work and you're in a specific ritual or working with someone for that, for working on something, you do. But when you are looking at your life process of, who am I? What am I here to do? What is unresolved within myself? You don't actually need to seek out specifically like, oh, I need to heal my daddy wound, or I need to heal my whatever. You just need to get clear in your process, and all of those things will come up organically as part of your creative process. And if you look at the 4 elements, the 4 seasons, the 4, that is the creative cycle. And within that creative cycle, you will be brought into the underworld. You will be brought into spring, into new growth. You will be brought into a phase of full expression. And that's exactly how creativity works. We're never just able to turn on a switch and just be creative. And part of the refinement of our power, our potency within, which is our ability to be a conduit for that creative energy, is to sorry, I lost myself there. I was just getting deep into the so let me find it again. So really, in essence, our as we become creators, we reclaim the parts of ourselves that make us truly powerful. And our true fulfillment in life is not through resolution of healing a wound. It's actually through receiving the gifts that we are meant to express in the world. And we don't really know what those are until we enter into that creative process. And that's what I understand about creativity. It's something that I've worked really deeply on within myself. and through these direct experience, work that I've done in the Bwiti tradition, as well as the other work that I've done, and studying a lot of different healing modalities. And I think that the hardest thing is the Western society wants to sell healing as this package, or like getting something that, you can't find within yourself. And it just kind of perpetuates that pattern. And the reality is this: the way nature works is, if something is not in harmony with life, it gets wiped out. So that's how nature works. The mycelium, the bugs, the parasites, all of these, destructive forces that break things down, break down what's no longer in harmony with life. And so if you're not living, which means in your creative process, you are basically, like, from a karmic perspective or from a spiritual site, open for attack for these destructive forces, meaning that you can have misfortune, sickness, malaise, if you're not in harmony with life. And that it's really simple. And so it's like, when we orient towards the creative process, we spiritually protect ourselves. We are safe. We are empowered. We are joyful. And so, it makes it really simple.
I think one of the interesting things maybe you were pointing to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like a lot of this work, I think maybe because of how we spoke, but because a lot in our Western society, we have become disconnected from these traditions, from these roots, from these ways of being, these, for lack of a better word, shamanic way of interacting with the world. But I think a lot of this work, we kind of place it in a framework that we can understand. And so it seems like a lot is being placed in a more psychological framework, which certainly psychology has, very beautiful medicine. I think especially people like Carl Jung were geniuses in their own right. But I think something that you were saying was very important. And it's this idea that, and I guess some gets back to this idea of surrender too, but often we come to these things with this idea of like, I need to heal this. So the example you used was like the daddy wound. And then that becomes kind of our worldview, our cosmovision, where our mind is at, but also where we're limited by. And that often, I think a lot of these very profound medicines are going on a level that's far, far beyond the mind, far beyond the rational mind of what I think is important or what needs to be done. But if the focus is only that, like, we lose a whole universe, whole dimensionalities of what we could potentially be able to access.
Yeah, really, ultimately, when you're in that process, there's so much emergence, and the emergence is something that we can't even name. And I think that's the biggest blessing and the gift. And, you can't really tap into the fields of flow and synchronicity, which I think are some of the biggest, greatest gifts that we have. It's the grace that is comes through when we do this work, and we can see, and I'm sure you've experienced it yourself, when we are fully cleansed, how much more it allows the grace and the synchronicity and the beauty to flow in our lives. So I think that's a really essential piece.
So what and again, speak however much you feel, but what was that experience like for you of going to Gabon, of working with Iboga in the Bwiti tradition? It's something that maybe more people are becoming aware of now, even just that medicine by name, maybe to some degree, some of the traditions, but it's still something that not a lot of people undertake. It's, as you said, it's a very big process. It's a long process. It's a very involved process. But what was that like? Just showing up in West Africa. I'm sure all sorts of things arose, experiences. I mean, even just kind of the expectation of what you're getting yourself into, I think for a lot of people is a huge kind of challenge just to overcome that, because it's like, I think most people realize like they're about to go into a very deep experience. So anything you can, obviously a lot of these processes are very personal too. So, but whatever you can share kind of around that experience.
I mean, the first thing I would say is that just like Peru and Brazil, there are people that have been initiated that go to the dark side. So there is a lot of sorcery, witchcraft, whatever, name you want to call it. And so, I really took my time before I went to Gabon to find the right person to work with that I knew was really working in a way that would bring about healing and, wasn't about money, wasn't about, one of the big issues, and this is very prevalent in Peru and Brazil as well, is as a woman, your sexual safety. There's been a lot of stories of, women being taken advantage of, even in initiation itself. And then on top of that, you have the safety of being in Gabon. It's a lot safer than Congo. I would say it's pretty safe in general. I mean, you have some pickpockets, in the cities, but in general, it's much safer than Congo. But you also have the risks of malaria, yellow fever. I mean, I've had some crazy stories. Like one of my friends who is like a really profound, prolific artist who's done a lot of Bwiti art. His name's Ben Taylor. He got bit by this fly and got this parasite in his body, and he had worms swimming in his eyeballs. So every time in his line of sight he'd be looking at things, he'd have these little squiggly worms, and he made a piece of art with an eyeball with the worms, which was like his view of seeing the worms in his eyes. And the joke, and it was almost like a joke of the medicine in a way, is that he had never been recognized for his art ever. And then the Journal for International Tropical Diseases found his art and published it on the cover. And so, and the most funny story is that my friend Jonathan Dickinson, I was telling that story to someone, he goes, "Oh, I ended up buying that piece. I own it. It's in my office." So I thought that was really hilarious. And then my other friend went out deep into the jungle to work with Adamagana, which is like a pygmy tribe, one of the Nima or medicine men of the Babongo Pygmy tribe, and he got river blindness, and he was so sick for like a year, and he's British, and he went to the Center of Tropical Diseases in London, and they figured out what it was, and they said, "Oh yeah, that village, that's the village where everyone comes and has stuff," like it was known, like that if you had been there, that you were going to come home with something pretty nasty. And so those kind of things like really scared me going into it, and I definitely took it very serious, because I do believe that if you're meant to be there, there's protection, there's spiritual protections, and that doesn't mean you don't ignore the 3D, because I don't care how much spiritual protection you have, it's not going to keep a mosquito with malaria from biting you. You still need bug spray and a little emergency malaria medication as well. So when I found Atum Rebenga. His son and I talked because his son speaks English. Atum only spoke French. And he did a divination and he said, yes, you have the blessing to come here. The spirits say the pathway is open, but it's not right now. So come back to me and we'll do another divination. And basically I did. And so that was in March. And then I came back to him in, I want to say like September or October, and he said, yes, you can come in December. So I went in December, and in this particular lineage of Bwiti, it's very different. Feng Bwiti is the feminine branch. So the anchor of the feminine branch is the Ngombe, which is the harp. In the masculine branches of Bwiti, the anchor is the Mogongo. So if you look at the Gonde Masoko, which is more of the Bwiti from the jungle, which is like closer to the way the Babango pygmies and the other pygmy tribes practice, it's a lot more harsh. They work with the Mogongo. They still work with the harp, but it's not the core piece within the work, and each one provides a different type of work in the brain. Like I feel like the Mogongo is almost like a jackhammer chiseling the calcification out of the brain, as where the harp is like Jacob's ladder. Each one of those 12 strings represents the 12 realms that you climb up into the higher realms. So the Bwiti Feng tradition is much more mystically oriented, much more feminine. It's oriented with taking lower doses of medicine versus the Misoko and like pygmy traditions, are kind of like Daniel Pinchbeck's book, Breaking Open the Head, where they stuff you so full of Iboga that they stick a pin, the Nema sticks a pin in you, and if you can't feel it, then they'll stop feeding it to you. And if you can't hold it down, they literally will put it up your butt with an enema, and they'll just pack you full of Iboga till you essentially are like to the brink of death. So in my specific lineage of Bwiti, we are from Egypt. So the pygmies came to Egypt, and this is the story as told by our elders. And in the story, it is said that the pharaohs received initiation, that the pygmies would come to the high courts and play harp for the pharaohs. Some of this information is accessible. Some of it's not. I personally believe if you look at the pantheon of gods in Egypt, you'll see they're all giants. And I don't know if you've been to Egypt before, but you see the statues. They're giants. And then you have this one little god named Bes that's about this big, and I believe that he is a pygmy. I believe they deified the pygmies because of what they brought to Egypt. And if you look on a map and you look near Cairo, just a little bit, I want to say southeast, if I'm not mistaken, there's actually a city called Bwiti. Bawiti, and it is the city for which the original pygmy village was. And there is a temple there dedicated to Bes, of course, a pygmy temple. And I would say that our lineage came from Abydos, which is where the first Osiris temple was erected, the original Osiris temple, which has not been maintained. It's something you have to get special access to. It's not like on the tourist map, but I've been to it, and each of the rooms is set up for a specific type of initiation, which is exactly what we do in Gabon. And so it's kind of like the chambers in the Great Pyramid, where you have the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the underworld chamber underneath the Great Pyramid. And you go in for 7 days. You go through all of these deep purification rituals. And then on one or more of the days, depending on what is divined, you receive the medicine. And each one has a specific transmission that is actually like encoded into the temple itself. So there is specific tasks while you're on the medicine. You're not just laying there having a psychedelic or whatever Iboga experience. You have a job in each of the initiations, and some of them are very hard jobs, especially when you're on really high amounts of medicine. You have tasks, you have people to see, to talk to connect with, and many times, like in my last initiation in Gabon, which I just returned from, I did an advanced initiation, which was actually really advanced. And in this initiation, we had to do very specific things, and we didn't do them. We didn't accomplish them. There was 3 of us, and we all had to like do them in order to do the initiation. And we were only supposed to take plant to work with the plant for 2 nights, and they made us do a 3rd night because they wanted us to complete this task. So you go into the chamber, and I can't really talk about a lot of the things, but I can say that the chamber is there's the chambers, but then there's a main temple, and the main temple is a complete replica of the cosmos. So when you go and there's so much ritual involved in the Fang Bwiti, specifically when you do your bath rituals, whenever you're in the temple, there's a very specific protocol of how you address each aspect of the universe, going through the entire cosmos. So like in the center of the temple, I'm allowed to share this, and there's a book on Bwiti. It's like a textbook. I think the guy's name is Ferdinand, who wrote it, and he talks about this kind of cosmic setup of the temple. In the middle is a pole that represents the cock, the masculine, the element of the masculine. Everything in Bwiti is about the balance between the masculine and the feminine. So the color white represents the semen of the male, and the red represents the menstrual blood of the woman. And so you have the pole in the temple, and then at the very bottom of it, there is a vagina. And then they take plants like ferns and they put them around the vagina to make it look like a bush. And the whole pole is decorated. And when they open up the ceremonial container of these rituals, the energy that comes in, and this is above and beyond the medicine itself, is palpable. I mean, it is profound. And the primary source of that energy is that pole in the middle, which is the masculine and the feminine coming together. So really, you're working with these incredible, profound ritual technologies that are designed to essentially be like a mind, body, spirit chiropractor, to align everything back in with the true source.
It's amazing. When I was working with Iboga, the first ceremony I did, there was just a tremendous amount of Egyptian, and I don't know, like even maybe pre-Egyptian, I have no idea, but symbologies and traveling. And then the final time was like this journey into space, into dimensionality. But I remember asking my teacher, the woman I was working with, and she said that same thing, that the pygmies used to be like the court priests for the Egyptians, and it blew my mind. One of the things that I think is so fascinating, I mean, and it kind of goes back to this idea of truth, as truth being one, of universal, is even, and because I don't know a tremendous amount of Iboga or the Bwiti tradition, but one of the things I also find fascinating is kind of these commonalities between the traditions. And when you said this idea of the 12 dimensions, it's very fascinating because there's one of my teachers in the Colombian Amazon, there's a group of people called the Tubu, and they have this kind of origin story that eons ago humans were suffering, and this kind of higher intelligence, these star beings, you could call them, interestingly, from the star system Sirius, which is also very fascinating because, like, even the Dogon in Africa, that's where they say their origin originates from. But they say that they transcended the 12 dimensions of time and space on this primordial anaconda canoe, and on that canoe they brought with them all of these plant medicines. So I think it's so beautiful, and just this idea of such a deeper knowledge that we do have this potentiality to access. Can you speak maybe just a bit more about the Bwiti tradition? Because I think more and more people are becoming familiar with Iboga, but maybe even more so than Iboga, ibogaine, and just the active alkaloid. But this idea of the richness of the tradition, and much like we were speaking about earlier, like the power of that. I mean, the instruments they use, the power of that, the tradition, the rites, the ritual, and even this idea of initiation, which I think and I know is something you speak a lot about. But there's so much there. I mean, it's such a complex system, and probably no one, even the people themselves, would be able to speak to all aspects of the complexity of things. But just anything you can speak about, because it's such a rich and fascinating tradition, and there's so many layers to it. And again, I think that's where, when people remove themselves from those rituals and those initiations, there's so much lost. I mean,
Yeah.
like, in general, people don't do things for no reason. And so if people have been doing things for probably thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on how we look at things, there's a reason they've kept those things up. There's a very deep importance to those, which I think often in our more modern kind of way, we have this hubris of overlooking those things, and there's just such a beauty and power to those.
Yeah, I mean, Bwiti, depending on the tradition, because each tradition, like, I believe, like, the Misoko, a lot of it is about healing and divination. And I would say, in terms of the most profound consultations and psychic connection that I've ever seen any individual exhibit, would be people in the Misoko lineage. They are the most powerful. They are the most strong, because it is a tradition that is designed to teach you how to survive in the jungle. Keep in mind that most of the pygmy tribes, if they have children, which most of them do, have had at least a death of one child. That's very uncommon in our society. I mean, it's just one expression of how hard living in the jungle is. It's completely unforgiving. So you need to be connected to your spiritual faculties in order to live. It's the only way you will not encounter misfortune and will survive and thrive. And Western society, we are not really designed for those initiations, nor are we ready, or do we need them. I don't believe that Misoko Bwiti is the best place to start. I think it actually makes Westerners more yang, which it almost imbalances us in a way. And I see that a lot with the practitioners, because I've known that lineage for longer than I've even been initiated in Fong. And I've studied the lineage, but I never got initiated because I didn't trust, which for a good reason, the person that I initially connected with. And I didn't want to be spiritually linked to that person, although I appreciate them and I have deep respect for them. It's really important to share, the most important thing to share, that getting initiated is not something you do as a psychedelic tourism or bucket list thing. When you are initiated, you are joining a society, just like the Eleusis mystery schools or just like the ancient mystery schools in Egypt. You are now becoming a member. As a member, you have responsibilities. And if you are not willing to uphold and be part of that community and take on those responsibilities, there are karmic repercussions for that. You do not want to do it until you are absolutely ready and you are absolutely able to make those commitments. Once you get initiated, the things that existed in your prior life, it's like the door is closed. So, it's kind of like, I hate to use the analogy of the Matrix movie where you take the red pill. And I remember one scene where the guy was like, man, I miss eating steak. I miss the flavor of having a big juicy steak. It's kind of like that. There are going to be things that relationships, situations, levels of comfort that you're accustomed to in your life that you will no longer have access to. And when you start to go to sleep, which we all have cycles where we're more awake than we are asleep and vice versa, we go through different periods and cycles in our life. There will be spirits connected to you that will wake you up, and it may not be in a nice way. So you have to take this commitment of getting initiated, like truly seriously. One of the number one things is, as an initiate, you are a protector of the tradition and the culture. That means you can't sell it. You can't give away information that you're not allowed to share. You cannot benefit from an ego fluff perspective, like allowing that to build up your ego. You have to be a guardian and a bridge. You have to really carry that with sacred reverence. The other thing is that you have a commitment to your Bwiti family. Your initiatory father is like your spiritual father. And this is not a cult. This is not something weird. It is a way that he's given you energy. He has paid many years of training and initiation and made sacrifices to be a conduit of that energy. And as a exchange, and this is how nature works, and something that our Western society many times doesn't understand, that a big part of Bwiti is the idea of giving back to the community financially, supporting the community. There's protocols of how that's done, how that's given. It's very common, especially in Misoko Bwiti, to pay very large amounts of money for initiations. And it's not because it's money focused. It's because it's supporting an entire village of people. In my last initiation, there's 3 people. We're laying on the floor. We're doing this initiation, and we have an entire village around us. There's like probably 30, 40 people, all singing, playing music, all supporting this healing process. All those people need to be fed. All those people need to be supported. Luckily, in Gabon, it doesn't cost that much money. And they live with dirt floors and chickens. And, it's not like, but it's not the pygmies who are living just off what's in the jungle. They have to go buy things like palm oil to cook with and supplies for the initiations and all these things to keep the village going. And so, yeah, you are part of that family, meaning what's mine is yours. That's that, like if you were to go into, a pygmy village, for example, and, the young hunter goes into the woods and he kills a nice piece of game. He comes back home. He's like, this leg is for my family. This leg is for my grandfather. This leg is for my aunties over here. It never belongs to just him. It's not like this is my food that I caught and I'm feeding my family. And that's because in the cultural understanding of what Bwiti is that you've opened a channel of blessing, of that Mabondo and that Musanza in your life that is always flowing. It's like a river of blessing that is continually flowing. So you have to constantly be making offerings back to keep that river in its right relationship of flow, to keep that energy in correct order. So it's not like you have to be like, oh, every first of the month, I send $300 to Nima Pablo. It's very specific. Like you'll get visions and it'll be like, oh, I'm supposed to help pay for the temple, the new temple that's going to be built, or I'm supposed, and it can be labor oriented. It's not just money oriented. It's about who are you, what resources you have, and what are you giving in relation to what you have. If you're a multi-billionaire who has a private jet and you go down to Gabon, you're probably going to be expected to give something much bigger than someone who has a very little salary and is a teacher and barely scraping by, but everyone gives what they can. There has to be some like strain or sacrifice. Sacrifice is such an important part of initiation and the giving. If it doesn't hurt, it's not really an offering.
I think that's such an important point, and like often, like for example, I worked at a big ayahuasca center for a long time, the Temple of the Way of Light, and I think from the outside there's often a lot of judgment of places that charge money, which is a strange concept because in general any service in our world is not free, and in fact doctors are some of the highest paid people because it's seen that they provide a very important service.
Yeah.
And not just an important service but their own cost of their own financial investment, their own time, their energy, the difficulty of the job, the strain on the body. And I think that's such an important concept is, again, this idea of reciprocity, of making a payment. And, if you're not making a payment, then in a sense, you're extracting something, you're taking something. And there's often this kind of like egoic or entitled way of looking at something that like a healer or something owes you. And traditionally, I think any good healer, if you came to them in need and you didn't have the ability in that moment to pay or to do something, would still work with you. But there was always an expectation that there was some reciprocity. I mean, even if it wasn't money, because maybe it wasn't a society of money. I mean, like you said, often you were indentured to that person. You would do labor with them for years to kind of pay off that energetic debt. And even, like you were mentioning with the Kogi, I mean, so much of their teaching is about this idea of making payments, that the kind of the root of disease is we've forgotten to pay. We take, but we're not giving back. We expect all of these things, but what am I doing? What am I giving? What is my part in this? And if we're all just taking and taking and taking, then of course there's going to be disease. Of course there's going to be disharmony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the third principle that I would say, and this is like really shortening it for our conversation, there's so much more and it's so in depth that, I think I want to leave with is love and humility. So ultimately, at the core basis, we're not trying to get anywhere. We're only trying to get to where we're supposed to be, which is we receive those instructions through direct experience in each of our initiations, meaning I don't go to Gabon and say, I'm going to be a Nima, I'm going to be an Iboga provider. That is not whatsoever. And there's a lot of misnomers out there because there are people that are selling that in the Bwiti community. But really the first thing is deep humility, being completely humble in all ways and really evaluating that throughout our lives. And then the love piece, which is that we're always operating from the heart. Like Bwiti always has to come from the heart. If it doesn't, it's corrupt. It becomes corrupt, and you can become corrupted no matter how far you go in your level of initiation. You can become corrupted, and the only way to be incorruptible is really to be always focused and centered on the heart. And really the idea of everything in Bwiti is about equanimity, balance, and the way that we stay and walk carefully in our heart. We don't get into a place where we get dysregulated or we get angry or we get out of love or we get overly inflated in our ego, is by walking that balance, walking that tightrope of equanimity and being loving towards all beings, being loving towards ourselves.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. I think one other thing that you mentioned is that you had some fear of was also this idea of sorcery, and it's something that you encounter in the jungle too, these ideas of black magic, of kind of witches and witchcraft. And I think for a lot of people, they may not even be familiar with that. Some people have heard of that, but they think maybe it's not real or it's not part of their worldview. Can you speak a bit about that? Because I think for a lot of maybe Western people coming to these paths, again, it's something that's just very foreign to them, that idea. And yet often things are spoken about in that way, that illness can come from someone, that spells can be cast, placed. And I think there's often also this idea that always this work is for the good, but much like human beings, like we're not always acting from a place of good. And even if it's not our intention, I mean, so many things, a thought that we have or a misplaced word, I mean, it can carry real power, and it can hurt and divide. Is that something you can speak a little, just to maybe shed some light on like maybe on a deeper level what that means, or what to think about those things? Because I think it's such foreign concepts to so many people.
I mean, I think there's two sides of the coin with the idea of sorcery. In the Bwiti tradition, there are entire lineages, like branches, that are designed to develop discernment and to understand sorcery and protect against sorcery. For example, within Mwiri, which is a tradition that typically is a men's initiation, it's a men's initiatory rite where no iboga is taken. There is a branch within there, which is a trial branch. It's like the first court system probably of the universe before we had Western court systems. And it's a divinatory system for when someone in a village or community is committing sorcery that's causing harm to the community. And one of the most common harms in the sorcery, and this is also very common in like voodoo tradition, like Wade Davis wrote the book The Rainbow, and is it The Rainbow and the Serpent? I'm trying to remember the title. I might be fusing two together, but he talks a lot about the different rituals with voodoo, which actually came from Gabon and from Bwiti. Some of it came from Yoruban practice as well, but I mean, they're like neighbors, and a lot of it is one and the same. Basically, they would, in this particular sorcery that was, there was a cycle in Gabon, or in that region in equatorial Africa, even before it was Gabon, where this was maybe we would call it a problem. And these sorcerers would kill somebody, and they would enslave their soul. And so the way that they enslaved their soul is they would bury the bones underneath their bed, so where they sleep at night. And they had specific plants and rituals, and they would essentially use this individual soul for the bidding. And many of the sorcerers would get greedy, and they'd want many souls so that they could have all these people working for them, doing their bidding. And so when they were accused, they would go to the high court, and typically one of the high masters of Wiri would be the judge, and they performed a divination where they gave a specific plant to a chicken. And if the chicken died, it meant the person was guilty. And if the chicken lived, it meant the person was not guilty. And so there was a way that they would do the ritual that they were able to make it an exact trial that, if the person was in fact guilty. And every time that they did, they would find the bones underneath. They'd go to the person's room if they, and they'd dig up under the bed and they'd find the bones. So that's like, I would say, like the deepest, darkest aspect of sorcery. The other sorcery is really, just utilizing the medicine, utilizing the spiritual power for one's own gain, for one's own, taking advantage of people sexually while they're vulnerable and on the medicine, and, financially taking advantage of people. Those are all, I would say, lesser evils compared to the sorcerer that's killing people, but still within the same bucket of sorcery. When we look at sorcery from an energetic and karmic perspective, and we look at modern society, I would say a lot of corporations are sorcerers. They're money extractive focused, power focused, and they are doing direct harm to individuals, whether it's GMOs in the food, not thinking about the unintended consequences of chemicals in the environment, the packaging that they're using, all of these things, when we live in a cause and effect universe, are in essence very similar to the kind of things that happen in sorcery. When we look at the government, and we look at, is the government in service to the people, or is the government in service to power? When we look at the responsibility of lives and the things that are happening related to war, that are related to decisions of people from a socio-economic perspective, all of these things. And then when we look at as an individual, if you are directly pointing hatred towards another, if you are pointing any intention that is not, I wish you well, that is sorcery too. If you are a public person and you are on podcasts and you have a very open field, and you do not have spiritual protections, which you get from initiation. I have also my protection bracelet from the Kogi Kagaba. These really work, but I have many different protections, and that doesn't mean I'm immune. to sorcery. Everyone can, but it comes in if there's a door open, and that's why you stay humble. So you don't have these doors that, these things can get in. But if people are jealous of you, if everyone sees you, Jason, on your Instagram, and they're looking through and they're like, why does that guy get to do this? And da-da-da-da-da. That person who sends those thoughts to you, that is sorcery. And so we have to be really conscious, because everything we do hurts us. So if you are putting those thought patterns into the psychic field of our collective consciousness, you are doing harm to yourself. If you are doing that in a consistent pattern on a consistent basis, you will manifest disease. You might have a heart attack. You might have cancer, but it will cause acidity and chaos in your body. If you want to thrive and be healthy, the most important thing you can do is be aware of what thoughts and what intentions you are putting into the world.
Yeah, I think that's a super good point, and I think a very wise way also of looking at this idea of sorcery, because everyone can be a sorcerer, and our thoughts are very strong manifestations of that. I mean, even as you said, looking at social media, looking at our political environment, I mean, it's so easy nowadays for people to demonize and just to speak horribly about people as if there's no repercussion for that. And ultimately there is. Everything has a cost.
Yeah.
Maybe this is amazing. I mean, we've gone over 2 hours. I think we could probably speak another 5 hours, but just being mindful of time. I know you have a lot of projects. I mean, we spoke briefly. You're opening up a place in the Azores, which is not too far from where I am. You have a book. You have the not-for-profit. Can you speak maybe just a bit about like what you're doing, the work you're involved in? Because I think you're doing some really interesting products, or really interesting things, and I think the audience would be really interested in just hearing more about all the things you're doing.
I mean, I am humbly so grateful that I've been chosen to serve in the way that I have. And I feel like the deeper that I go, the more I am blessed with. So when I was in Gabon in 2018, I was asked to write a book called Seeding Consciousness, Plant Medicine, Ancestral Wisdom, and Psychedelic Initiation. And that was birthed into the world November of last year, 2024. And really, I wanted to softly introduce the understanding of what it really means to be initiated and how you operate in the world in a way that individuals could grasp and really connect to understanding what the inner work is about, what the overall process is, and what the end goal, this understanding of mastery is. And so I wanted to create it in a way, because a lot of the stuff that I've studied so many traditions. Like, I've been a Taoist practitioner for 15 years. I've, read all of the like Manly P. Hall. I'm a big fan of Rudolf Steiner. And, some of it is distorted because I feel like in the time that we're living in, which is the darkest part of the Kali Yuga, which we're coming out of, a lot of the teachings are distorted. So I really believe, direct experience is the most potent way, with the right initiated and experienced mentors, I guess you could say. So this book really is designed to help kind of create that basic scaffolding. You could even call it like a pre-initiation, like kind of preparing people to be ready on a spiritual level to step into a more initiatory way of being. And then Ancestral Heart I started in 2019, but it's work that I've been doing since 2015, but formalized it into an organization which is Indigenous-led stewardship. And what that means, there's a lot of nonprofits doing ecological work. There's a lot of nonprofits working with Indigenous elders. But the way we work specifically, which I'm not aware of any other organization except for I work really closely with Grandmother Jyoti Ma of the Fountain, that is doing things in this way, but we work directly through the spiritual masters of the tradition, and they do consultations, and that's what determines the work that we do. So we're not just like, oh, here's some money to build a well, or, for rainwater harvesting or solar panels, or how can we help? Can we build a school? It's like we're really tapping into the greatest need of what needs to come through. And there is a greater orchestration. And forgive me, there is one other organization that is following this called Earth Elders, and I work really closely with Mindahi Bastida Munoz, who is a Atomi Toltec timekeeper from Mexico. And he was in a ceremony and Grandmother Jyoti was there as well. This was in 2012, and it was related to the eagle and condor instructions, the prophecy of the eagle and condor. And it was a global gathering of every tribe from the Werereka to Atomi to Lakota to, tribes, different tribes from Alaska to Greenland, everywhere in the entire world. And all these elders were in prayer together. And then Spirit called, and those who had the ears to hear received the message that they were to step into a lodge together, and they received 5 mandates. And these 5 mandates are essentially the instructions of this time period that we are moving through, which is intensifying up to 2027. It's an important crossing for all of Earth, for all of humanity. And one of the mandates is this idea of, Western Western individuals and Indigenous elders working together collaboratively, following the spiritual protocols, establishing councils of these elders to essentially receive the instructions for humanity to help kind of guide us into this birth canal that we're in. But then another big piece is the original houses of thought. And the original houses of thought are essentially temples for healing. And when we look at the Kogi, who are kind of like the backbone of the whole thing. I mean, that's why it happened in La Sierra, on the land of the Kogi. Their huts that they use for dreaming, which there's a very specific type of dream work, which are a mirror of the cosmos. They call them original houses of thought. And so when I was with Mama Luis, and Mama Luis just passed away. He's like one of my first Kogi that I met in 2015. This was in 2018 in Barcelona. They have the capacity to telepathically communicate. So if you look at the ancient history, and if you've received information related to the times of Lemuria, it used to be that people would speak telepathically. And now with the telepathy tapes, we're starting to learn that this is something that is real and that people can telepathically communicate. The Kogi, Mama Luis and Mama Evangelise gave me a message, and they told me to build the center in Azores. So I received that as a set of instructions, and they gave me the exact design of the building, which is basically a modern version of a house of original thought. And I'm working alongside Maganga Mananzambe, which is the cultural Indigenous Stewardship Council of Bwiti, which is Gonde Misoko Bwiti, then it will be next incorporating Fong Bwiti, which is my lineage of Bwiti is my lineage of study. Within that, there will be some other houses of original thought that I was told that I'm to help support building. So I'm building those as they're manifesting and working on the center in Azores. And what's interesting about Azores specifically is that after receiving the message, I did not have a location. And then in 2019, end of 2019, right before COVID, I was in my morning, I do Taoist meditation in the morning. I was in my meditation in the morning and it told me it's time to build the center. And I said, where? And it said the Azores. And I was like, I looked up the Azores on the map. And I'm like, you want me to build a center in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? I'm like, almost like laughing. And I'm like, what's the name? And it said Hugh. And I was like, almost didn't believe it. I was like, Hugh. And I looked it up and it wasn't easy to find, but it's an ancient Kemetic word that means the sound that wisdom makes when it enters the initiate. So it's definitely a place of initiation in some respect, but maybe not the Bwiti Iboga initiation because there's no legal framework yet for that. However, that could change. A lot of things are changing really fast in this world, but I am going to honor whatever framework it wants to be open to. And if it opens and changes, then I will move with that. So yeah, those are all my projects. And then I have another book, which books take a long time. So I'll just say I just had a conversation with my agent and my publisher, and they're very excited about it. And it will be really about the darkness, like the deep, 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 deep darkness, which I'm really excited about writing about because, you know, it's really understanding how to work with that and how to use it as a healing technology, darkness technology. Not in an evil way, in a loving, compassionate way.
Well, amazing. I think the Azores is special land. I still haven't been there, but interestingly, when I was in the Amazon, probably 10 or more years ago, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I felt a very strong call to that land. And even at the time, I didn't know anything about it, but I think it's very special land, whether it was the center, a satellite of the Atlantean civilization. It's I'd imagine that there's some real power to that land. So it's amazing you're doing that. And thank you so much. This was really a pleasure to connect with you. I'd love to go another number of hours. Unfortunately, I have a workshop myself that I'm running, and I think my partner would be angry if I show up late. But I'd absolutely love to do another round and just to stay connected. And thank you just so much for sharing so beautifully and profoundly, and for all you're doing. I think you really are a bridge of this work, and I think it's really an important role is to bridge these worlds, to connect, to weave things back together, and to create a new earth. So thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you. You know what my spiritual name is in Bwiti?
I don't.
Muhe Sangana, and it means world bridger.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know. I'm learning what that means through the process. And I deeply bow to your work, your integrity, your heart. And outside of these conversations, I want to do more together. And I look forward to, I've never done a tobacco dieta, and part of the Black Mamba, which is this book that I'm working on next, which is about the darkness, has a lot to do with tobacco. So I think it'd be important for me to do a diet while I'm working on the book.
Well, sounds good. Anytime you have an open invite.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it. I really enjoyed that conversation. It was really a pleasure for me to connect with her. As I said, I think she's doing really beautiful work, and I think the quality of the work that she's done really shines forth in the wisdom that she shares. So I hope you all enjoyed that. As I mentioned in the intro, if you're interested in working with me and my colleague Marav Artsy, dieting plants, working with tobacco, working with trees, as of now of shooting this, we are all sold out for this year, 2025, but hopefully in the next couple months, we'll have our 2026 calendar up on my website, which is nicotianarustica.org, and you can always follow on Instagram at Jason Grachanik, which I always keep updated as well. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help. Patreon is a wonderful website. It works off this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast, it's a really beautiful way to give back and to support and to help me to continue bringing on these amazing guests like Tricia. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. And then always just supporting the algorithms is a big help. So if you're viewing this, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. And if you're listening to this, still the big platforms, Apple Podcast and Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So that's it. I hope this finds you all well. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.